Hi there, I'm John and welcome back to my YouTube channel. And if you're new here, welcome. I'm John from Nigeria, and on this channel I talk about books. I do the occasional singular book reviews, book tags, book hauls, everything bookish, you find it here. And if you're a fan of essay length written review, I write for a Substack called A Couple of Dogs Substack. I'll put it up here, but I'll also put the link down below. So if you like lengthy written reviews, you can check out the website. So I'll admit that I've already filmed this video before and I did not like the cut I had because there was so much noise in the background that day. So I'll be trying to make it very fast today because I stay in a student area, and yes, they're relatively like my age, but also they are still going to school, so everywhere is so busy during the day. So I'm just going to rush through it. And yes, I know it's the middle of June, it's approaching the middle of June, but I'll do my April wrap up now, and my next video will be my May wrap up. And yes, so in April I finished 5 books. The first book I finished in April was Slouching towards Bethlehem by Joan Didion, and this is a collection of essays. I think this is Didion's first collection of non-fiction essays where it really looks at California in a nutshell. She was a Californian, she was from Sacramento, and we have a lot of like essays about California, but then there are some personal essays mixed in here. I think the bulk of the essays in here were collected and were submitted to different magazines around, I think, the 60s. Yes, the 60s. I think it's very few essays in here that are from the early 70s, but most of the essays in here are from around 61 to 65. And there are some essays here on celebrities. We have one on Joan. I don't know if that's how you say her name, but she was a very prolific folk singer in the 60s. We have one here on John Wayne. So it's a mix of like reportage but also personal essays. And yes, the idea of the title of the essay is Slouching towards Bethlehem. There's a titular essay here with that same title where Didion said it was like looking at a time where nothing felt I don't know if to say stable. The beginning of that essay says the center was not holding. That's the first sentence of that essay, and it's just looking at the tumult of the time, the chaos of the time. I think yes, they look at different things. Each essay goes into different things, but like the core of the collection, that was really what it was looking at, like the center not holding, whether it's the titular essay talking about the hippies movement that occurs in the 60s with a lot of young people moving over to San Francisco. And there are so many like singular moments in each of like these essays, and I would not say I loved it as a whole. I think I prefer the personal essays as opposed to the ones that felt more like reportage style, because Didion, yes, she was a writer, but she was also like a journalist. Above all, she was one of the most prolific journalists of her time who kind of ushered in this like new wave journalism movement. She's said to be one of the pioneers of that style of journalism, along with Hunter S. Thompson and some other people. So I would say, like, while I did not, let's say, love all the essay, I think it's not just that it was specific to California and me being from across the world, but I think anybody who reads it, you either take to it or you do not take to it, because then if you have stayed in a small town, even in the US, if you have stayed in a small town all your life and you do not know much about like where Didion is writing about, you really cannot, like, that border is not able to be crossed, right? Because you really do not know California. But yes, the core of a lot of these essays just show that Didion knew California and wrote about it in such a way that I have not seen before. It's where a writer like just has such a hold on a place, and her voice, if anything you take from the collection, you know that she has such a singular voice. Like there's no voice I've read like Didion, whether it's when she's writing about place or when she's writing about even the personal. So I think I lean more towards the personal essays. And the highest highlight in this collection for me was the essay that made me read the collection, and it was Goodbye to All That, the last essay in the collection. I think I read it back in maybe January or February when I was preparing to move houses and I had graduated and my time in that place was done, and it just like felt like it met me at such a specific time in my life. And then I reread it again at the end of this collection, and it's one of my favorite things, maybe the most important thing I've read the whole year. Just that single essay and how it just affected me, affected my life, my eye. I'm working on an essay that is more personal, but it's kind of inspired by Didion's essay Goodbye to All That, which actually looks at her in the, I think it was sometime around the 60s, where she was moving from California to NY, and it was going to New York for the first time, and she thought she was going to stay there for maybe 6 months, for a short time, but instead she ends up staying in New York for 8 years. And it's just it's a very short essay, around 9 pages or so, but it really looks at that time in her life, and there are just so many like specific lines from here that hits you as a 20-something-year-old, because that was the same age she was at when she wrote that essay. And I just was so moved, because it's a woman across the world in a much different time, like years ago, but then you notice that your experience now is not like unique to you, which is one of the quotes that really struck me in this, that one of the mixed blessings of being 20 and 21 and even 23 was like I'm paraphrasing, but it was like Didion saying that one of the mixed blessings of being those ages is the thoughts that what is happening to you in the moment is happening only to you, but then it's really happening to maybe everyone who is experiencing that age with you. And it's how my life has felt like these past few months, with, let's say, all the things that all the hurdles that have come with it, and it has just felt like so tumultuous. There have been really hard days with my feeding or something's always happening to something, whether it was when I got robbed, or it was just so much happening at the same time, and I thought life was just hitting me over and over and over again. And I think this essay, yes, a different topic, but I saw myself in Didion at 21 moving to New York for the first time, because yes, I've been here for school for the past 5 years, but this is like the first time I'm here outside of the border that is school. I do not have school tethering me to anything anymore, and it's just like being released into the world actually for the first time. And I graduated like relatively very young. You can say I'm 21 now. I graduated when I was 20, and I got into college when I was 16, because that's how it is here a bulk of the time for people. And so it's just like trying to figure out life so young. And I think, yes, of all the essays in the collection, that was the one that just struck me the most. I liked the titular essay, Slouching towards Bethlehem, also. So yes, it's not a collection I would say I overly loved, but I do want to read everything that Didion has ever written. She's one of the few authors that I want to read anything she has put out in her life when she was here. So yeah, I gave it 3 stars, and I think I recommend. The next book I finished in April was Love in the Big City by San Young Park. He's a Korean writer. This is translated from the Korean by Anton Hor. I think he's quite an up-and-coming translator, but he has done some notable translated works from the Korean. And yes, I read this with a friend who I usually mention on the channel. If you have been following me for a long time, one of my friends here, we read this together, and this is like a book that kind of looks at a queer man in his 20s in Korea, and it's divided into 4 sections. So it's actually following the same man, but in a way, the way the book is written feels like a collection of stories about the same person's life, but then it's kind of linear when you actually go through it. So it makes it seem more like we are getting snapshots of a life. But yes, it's a novel that looks at our narrator. I don't know if to call him Mr. Young or leave him unnamed, because I cannot remember for certain if we really actually got his name. But we follow this queer man coming up in Korea, and we see him mostly through his 20s. So at the beginning, we get the first section of the essay dedicated to his best friend when he in his early 20s, and it's like maybe my favorite part of the book, because I am such a sucker for books about friendship, stories about friendships. And we see how the two of them navigate their 20s, a guy and a girl living together, but really it's platonic relationship, and it attests to the idea that even platonic relationships like of opposite sexes can like feel as big as romantic love and as important as it, because I always speak of how friendship is so important to me. And I really love the way it's written. Like the voice is very matter of fact, the writing style, the way Park writes his narrator is so matter of fact. I don't know if it's a specific Korean thing, because I see it in Japanese fiction it also, where it's like just like 1-2 1-2 1-2, and that's how this feels. It's just like putting the words down as they are. It's just like more narration style, where it's just everything as it's happening being told to us, and we follow him moving through that part of his 20s with his friend Jehi, and all the obstacles they come upon as 20-year-olds, like a straight woman and a queer man, and it's just how they like each other's like lifeline at that point in their life. And as we move to the next section of the book, we see that it's kind of like the first story is like its own story in its own right, because yes, I said we are following the same life, but in a way Jehi becomes absent, and it feels deliberate because it was frustrating reading it, because you wonder how somebody that had so much impact in his life, we are still following him in his 20s, and the timeline kind of becomes like confusing, but then you just have to be paying very close attention to like notice these things. So it gets frustrating at points, but we see it's really kind of like how different events in his life were just happening at that specific time, and every other thing felt like they were in the background. So we get him with his friend Jehi at the beginning, and the next part we get is him like grappling with this relationship he gets into with an older man who is like 12 years his senior, but at the same time his mother is in the hospital for cancer, and she has to, and he's the only person she can rely on, and he's the only person she has to take care of her, because it's that thing where I always feel like, I say it a lot, where I feel like Korean, Japanese culture, they kind of feel like our African culture, not exactly in everything, right, but they are very traditional in the way we Africans are very traditional, where you have your parents, and when they grow older you are kind of expected like to take care of them, like take care of them, like be, or like their care is for you, and it's kind of like you are repaying them for like raising you up and things like that. It's not always like that, but in Africa that's really what it looks like, and I like that it kind of looked like the same thing for our narrator, who is grappling with this mother who is dying from cancer, and she is very religious, holding on to God, and it's her like not being able to accept her son, but also like being very dependent on him, and it's having just like these two cosmic life events happening at the same time. The mother grappling with her cancer, but falling in love with this very much older man who kind of operates his life in every sense, because it's such a very toxic relationship we see, and it's so sad, so frustrating. But yes, we move into other parts of his life eventually, and I just loved how, like I said at the beginning, it felt like snapshots of different points in his life, and how it does not look like a certain point in your life will pass, but then it eventually passes, and you cannot even remember sometimes, like, oh, this happened to me. And I really loved this small book. Both I and my friend, we enjoyed it so much. It hit me, I think, the day I finished it. I was going to cry, but I was able to hold myself so much, but there was such a sinking feeling in my chest that I could not read anymore. I could not begin a new book, so I just decided to go ahead and sleep. I loved it. I gave it 4 stars. The next book I finished in April was The Unknown Masterpiece by Honoree de Balzac. I don't know if that's how you say his first name, but I think he's a very notable classic writer. I read him in this NYRB copy. I read him physically, but I've since like sold that copy away. But yes, The Unknown Masterpiece, it's actually 2 short stories, or 2 stories in one, 2 of Balzac's stories in this one small book. And the first story, The Unknown Masterpiece, kind of follows a young man who goes to the house of a very known painter, the painter who is his idol. And when he gets there, he kind of encounters another older man who is a very famous painter as well. But it's that realization that even your favorite has somebody they look up to, and it's the way he looks up to this famous painter and thinks everything he does is perfect. He wants to learn under him, but then he gets there and he sees somebody schooling the person who he wants to learn under, and he's unable to grapple with it, that who is this man who is talking to you the way he's talking to you, and you are so submissive listening to him. And what the story really looks at is an artist who is the only person who can see his work, who can comprehend his work, and like he is so in love with the art and so in love with art, his painting, that it's entirely like oblivious to every other person around them, where they begin to like ask this older man who is the one schooling the mentor of the younger man, they ask him to see this very famous painting he describes, because he talks to them about painting. The way Balzac writes it, it creates like this conversation around art and painting that you can tell it's very like created conversation, but it feels so organic, so original. And like, yes, it's like the French doing very French thinky things, right? But at the same time, I really liked how like how there was so much thought put into like the conversations that characters have with each other, and it's like just feels like you are sitting in a group of thinkers or one thinker, and there are like two younger men watching this thinker just think and experience like his thinking process. And I really like the first story, and the second story, Gambara, which is in it, kind of actually looks at the same theme of like the artist who is the only person who can understand their art, because in Gambara we follow a man who, he's a composer, he's an instrumentalist, and he's really poor, he's married, and it seems like he continues to use all the money the wife makes. The wife, they do not have so much. The wife works like maker jobs to feed both of them, and the man wants to practice his art. He's like, he wants to develop himself in his composition, he wants to become a famous composer, but then it seems like nobody is able to understand his compositions, understand what he plays, but it's like he's the only one who can hear beauty in whatever he plays. Then there's this wealthy man who comes over to this town, because I think it's set in France, I cannot remember where, but there's a wealthy man who comes there and kind of encounters the wife, and he falls in love with her. The story is just so tumultuous. I think Balzac kind of does the same thing with conversations surrounding art, but this time it's more surrounding music and composition. And while yes, you can tell he really goes for it, like I said, in the way like the French do, even though I've read three French works by now, because I read the third one in this month, but I read George Perec like 2 years ago or 3 years ago at this point, and his the way he was like, I'd never read anything like him when I read him, and I was like, I saw traces of that thing where is this a French like thing with the writing, not that they have the same style, but this idea of like so much thinking going on in their works. And it happens here with the thoughts on music and musical composition. But then I did feel like it gets a bit too like it isolates the reader in a sense, and it gets too like in its head about what it's trying to do. I did like it overall. I gave the collection 3 stars, and I enjoyed it, but it's not like something I loved. I would say I had a very strong April, because the next 2 books, the last 2 here, I quite like. The first one is Conclave by Robert Harris. This is the Conclave that the Oscar-winning film Conclave is based on. And yes, I finished it in April. I was blown away, especially by the ending. I think it is very standard mass market thriller, but in a way I feel more improved and just has more flair, more sauce to it, because there's so much description that goes in here. At the beginning, we are met with the death of the Pope. The Pope has died, so in a few weeks we have the conclave coming up to pick the next Pope. That's the central story. The next Pope is about to be chosen, and it's who is going to become Pope amongst these characters who we get introduced to. So our main character is a man called Cardinal Lomeli. Is the dean of the College of Cardinals, so he's the one in charge of the conclave. And we have like this minor surrounding characters, supporting characters, who we have the people who are playing for the conclave, then we have like some of the outside characters. And I think this was such a big, the adaptation was so big culturally, especially in the past few months with the Pope dying, and it's kind of exposing people to the workings of the conclave, because I never knew what a conclave was like. And yes, it's said that it's a fictional story. It uses some real names but fictionalizes everything. So but then it does give you that inkling of what an actual conclave is like. It's so like very thrilling, and it's like so detailed, and it's also very slow paced. It moves so slowly and rich with detail, but the details do not feel like overdone in the way you would expect some of this mass market fiction to feel, but here every detail is so essential to the story, and I loved the end. It has such an insane twist that it's sure to put some readers off because it can not make too much sense, but I found I drived with it. It hit me and I was stunned. Like, the thriller thrilled at the end, I can assure you that. I very thoroughly enjoyed it. This is definitely one of like my top 10 books of the year. And the final book I finished in April is the only one I have physically, and it's Adolphe by Benjamin Constant, which I showed in one of my last videos. And in this book we follow a young man who has just graduated. He's 22, and yes, he is very introverted, very to himself, and he decides to travel to this very small town. He has a wealthy father who is expecting him to take over like the father's business. He is such a, I would say, closed off character, but then he goes to this small town and he eventually comes across a woman who is the mistress of one of the most famous men there, one of the richest men there, but she's not married to him. She's his mistress, but they have been together for 10 years, and everybody in the town regards her as like the man's, sort of his wife, even though she's not his wife, because she has 2 children by him, or he has 2 children by her, and so they live together. But then narrator Adolphe goes to this small town. He gets invited to the house of this wealthy man. He begins to observe this man's mistress Eleanor, and he gets fascinated by her because he is so fascinated with how she speaks, finds her very intelligent, one of the most intelligent women he had ever met, and it's said that he falls in love with her and decides to pursue her, but she at the beginning rejects his pursuit because she's tied to the man she's tied to. But after much back and forth, you know what happens. She eventually agrees to succumb to the affair with him, the relationship with him. And does this sound familiar? Yes. Anna Karenina, does that sound like that? Yes, just different circumstances. Although I constantly read this and wondered if Tolstoy was inspired by this in any shape or form, because yes, this is much shorter. I don't think this book is up to 100 pages. It's around 90 or something, and it was written way before Anna Karenina was written, maybe like almost 50 years, if not more, before Anna Karenina was written. But then just the core story is so it's so like Anna Karenina, just with what the difference is, like all the embellishments around Anna Karenina, the supporting character, the other characters, etc. It's very short, but at the same time so painful in how it progresses and the way it's written. I think it was said that it's written without too many like descriptions, barely, like I can say maybe 1% of description. Most of this book is just straight up telling, Adolphe just narrating the situation as it progressed and where it hits the peak, and it was very small but also stabbed me in the heart by the end. I really enjoyed like this reading month, and I thank you so much for watching it. Please like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one. I'm in a hurry, that's why I'm shifty, and so bye.